Okay, I have a question here. I'm doing something a little different than I normally do, so this question is not meant to offend anybody, but it's part of the little game I'm going to play. Are there any non-Catholic Christians here? Okay, so I want you to all close, well, first of all, move back from your table so you can stand up if you so desire. Okay, so just move back a little bit from your table. Nobody's moved. Okay, I want you to close your eyes. Everybody close your eyes. If I see your eyes open, I'm going to throw you out of the room, okay? Just kidding. Close your eyes. Come on. Okay, I walk in here with 4 other people, and I'm dressed in extremist garb, and I've got we're all armed with machine guns. And we say, okay, we are extremist Muslims, and we are going to kill any of the Christians in here. So I want all the Christians to stand up.
I'm a Christian, but I'm going to do this.
Okay, now with your eyes closed, we all take off our garb and we say, yes, we are Muslims, but we're actually interested in finding out why you are Christians or Catholics, and I want each of you to give me a reason. Okay, go ahead and sit down. And without spending all the time going through that, I hope that you are willing to die for your faith. Because if you're not willing to die for your faith, you're going to be faced with examples or events in your life where you're going to constantly decide whether or not you're going to compromise or not. And what do I mean by that? For you young people, if you're not homeschooled, if you're in a public school, there's going to be a time you're going to be with kids and somebody's going to say, okay, let's do drugs, let's do sex, whatever. It's going to be things that are against your moral values. And for those of us who are a little bit further along in life, it's going to be when you're in your job, you're with a group of friends or whatever, and you're going to decide, okay, is this worth putting my faith on the line if I could lose my job, lose a promotion or whatever? And what I'm going to try and do in my talk today is to try and encourage you to get to that point where you know enough about your faith and you love your faith enough that it's a no-brainer. When somebody says something that's really obnoxious or against what you believe in a charitable way, you stand up. You don't sit there and calculate in your mind, okay, is this girl or guy who really likes me going to break up with me? Are people going to say mean things about me? All the time, it's just, okay, what can I do to stand up for what I believe in, not worrying about the human cause? Okay. One of the reasons I started giving this talk, I went to a Jesuit high school outside Chicago, and by the time I was 26, 3 of my classmates, guys who I was actually in a class with, had committed suicide. Okay? One of them was a druggie. Okay, that's what we called him back then. I don't know, I knew he did pot, I don't know what else he did, but so I have a real problem with the whole pot thing, because this is one guy, it didn't surprise me. Now the 2 other guys were very normal people. They weren't picked on, they weren't, you know, unattractive or whatever. They were actually pretty smart. I never found out why things got so bad for them, but I do, to this day, wish maybe I had encouraged them to be a little bit more involved like my parents did to me, because I've never really had a problem with figuring out what my purpose is in life. So what I'd like to do is give you 6 principles that I've sort of developed over the years, which hopefully you'll see some positive things in your life, and talk about some of the events that happened in my life that I think God has worked a miracle due to no, merit on my own, but working in the fields has gotten it. So the first one, and this is the most important principle, that if you embrace this, I think all the others are encompasses, and that's live each day as it might be your last. The last 4 things: death, judgment, heaven, and hell. Because if you do that, you'll find, as young people, when somebody says something really negative about you on Facebook or whatever, you're not thinking, okay, this is how I'm going to get back at that person, because you're going to pass away tonight. So if you're thinking you're going to die, you're not going to hold that grudge. You're not going to think, okay, here's how I'm going to get back at somebody, because I'm going to be facing God tonight. Okay? Secondly, I think that question I asked you, why are you a Catholic or a Christian? You should be able to answer that question. I look at the final judgment that when I stand before God, He's going to say, you know, there was this kid, Jimmy Cohen, a Jewish kid, who asked you, why are you a Catholic? When you were in high school and you didn't know. Well, you were the only one that Jimmy ever asked, why are you a Catholic or a Christian? And Jimmy never asked anybody again. Now, is that going to get me damned to hell? No, I don't think so. But that's not how you should be asking the questions. The question is, am I responding in every situation like God wants me to respond? The second one is see Jesus Christ in everyone, including yourself. Then we are born standing next to the selfish tree trunk. And what I call that, if for those of you from Virginia, the Shenandoah Valley is really beautiful. And I imagine standing in an oak tree and I'm hugging the oak tree. And every time that I get involved, like in a Face the Truth tour or any other thing, you volunteer, getting better in your faith, whatever, you step back from the tree so less of your view is taken up with the tree and you can see the beauty of the world. Now it's a risk. There's always a chance that you're going to fall off a branch. But in my life, I've fallen off some branches, but God has always been there. Whereas some people never leave the safety of that tree. And you can see those people. They're in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and they're very, let's say, unhappy because they've gotten to the end of life. In fact, I went back to Philadelphia with my father, who's now 93, about 8 years ago, and we met some of his friends. And they went to a very, let's say, upper-class prep school, okay? So I just happened to be sitting next to this one guy who was 86. Never met the guy before, and he said two things. He says, again, this were high school classmates. He said, there was something about your father. He was always nice to everybody. And my father was a very good athlete, so sometimes athletes can be, you know, hey, I'm better than you. Whatever. I was never a great athlete, so, but I'm sure some of you have experienced that. You know, they think they're better, but this guy remembered what my father did 75 years before. And another thing he said was, I got my handicap down to a 6 in golf. So, and this was a guy who was very successful, very rich, okay, at a construction company. And he was in the twilight of his life looking back and going, geez, maybe I spent too much time on my golf game. Now, I like to golf. I'm nowhere near a 6 handicap. But I think the point is, you want to be at the point where no matter how short your life is, if you get, you know, God forbid, killed in a car accident or whatever, you're not going to stand before God and say, you know what, I was going to start doing that faith thing when I got married or when I was 25 or whatever, down the road. Because as Christ says, I will come like a thief in the night. Okay? Every day you make a commitment to serve God or ourselves, we're either getting closer to or further from God. There's no plateaus in our relationship with Him. And I want to warn you that what you guys are doing is great. Probably 0.0002% ever spend this much time doing what you're doing, especially the kids who are going to be there all week, and that is great. But come next week, every morning you start with a new slate. You don't live on what you did. And I suggest you read like Paul's letters. He was constantly being beaten. And he would just pick himself back up, and he was back there. You know, he could have said, you know what, Lord, I've been beaten 3 times this month. That's it for 6 months. Okay? And that's how all of you have to be. And don't ever judge yourself. I had a real problem with this for about the first 30 years of my life. I was constantly comparing what I did to what other people did. In other words, hey, I'm on the Face the Truth tour, so I must be better than the people who haven't been on the Face the Truth tour. So then one year I didn't go, and I saw somebody else, and I started feeling negative about not doing as much as that guy does. And that's not where God wants us. God wants us to do what we can and be joyful of what we can do. Don't compare yourself to other people. Number 5, it's God's body, not ours. Okay, you'll constantly hear this from the pro-abortion people, from people using drugs, etc. Well, it's my body, and it's not your body. Each of us are stewards of our bodies for a certain period of time. And one of the things that's helped me really appreciate that is my father's 93. If he lives to be 100, 100 years compared to eternity is nothing. It's a blink of an eye. Okay? So you don't want to do anything that's going to give you a chance of losing eternity. You can't think of it. If you ever try to think of eternity, you think, well, then it'll end, then it'll end. It never ends. And in my life, suggesting that to people tends to get people to start thinking. Now, number 6, and the last one, life is an orchestra. God is the conductor, and nobody can play your music. Okay? I can't do what Jack does. Jack can't do what I do. You might think you're the least important person in the world, but there's people who only hear your music. Okay? Mother Teresa can't play your music. I can't play your music. And if you don't play that music, then the people around you are not going to play their music as well. They're going to make bad choices. If you're quiet when there's a moral dilemma, they're not going to make as good of choices. And you are going to be held responsible for not playing your music. I was listening to EWTN radio just this week, and this 26-year-old called in, and she said, when I was 23, I was living an immoral, promiscuous life. And I would talk about it in front of my parents, and my parents never said anything because they didn't want the conflict. But my younger sister had the guts to confront me and talk to me about losing my soul, etc., etc. Well, about a year later, my life fell apart, and I went back to my sister for advice because she's the one that had the guts to challenge what I was doing. So all you parents, I run into a lot of parents, well, my kid moved in with so-and-so, and, you know, everybody's doing it. Well, the interesting thing is, if you read the gospel, God talks about the final judgment, and the only time he talks about the majority, he says, the road to perdition is wide and many choose it. The road to everlasting life is narrow. So if you want to make an extrapolation, which I don't think God wants us to do, you could say the majority are in hell. But I always tell people they're big places, heaven and hell. There's always room for one more. And at the final judgment, it's just going to be you. It's not going to be the pro-life movement. It's not going to be the Republican Party. It's not going to be St. John's Church. It's going to be you and God. And once you understand that, you sit there and ask yourself, what does God want me to do in this situation? Okay? And you're not worried about, well, gee, 8 of my friends are doing this, that, or the other thing. Now, there were 3 major events in my life. I was in 8th grade, and I was on the football team. And so I'm riding a bike home. And I lived outside Chicago, so the trains always came from the south, from Chicago, to our suburb, right? And so the train gates are down and the bells are ringing. And stupidly, I figured, oh, well, I'm on a bike, I'm in 8th grade, I'm pretty smart, right? So I looked down the track, and I literally went around the gate on the sidewalk, over the track, and at that wall, there was a train which had not stopped in our train station going about 60 miles an hour with the guy laying on the horn. And only by the grace of God did I not get killed. In fact, it was so bad, there was a woman in a convertible on the other side of the road, of the tracks. She was hysterical. She's like, what, are you crazy? And I was like, no, just stupid. So that was one thing that God kind of told me, okay, you're living on borrowed time, I need you. The second thing, I was in the Navy, and when you get out of the Navy, they give you a chest x-ray. Okay, so we had an x-ray machine in our ship. So I'm 26 years old, married, and the doctor on our ship says, hey, I found there's a white spot on your x-ray. Our x-ray machine isn't that good, so I'd like you to go over to the base. Now, 6 months before, one of the guys my age had been taken off the ship because he had a cancerous lump in his chest. So I had 24 hours to think about, okay, let's say things were bad and this was it. I only had 5 or 6 months. And then the third thing that happened, my brother, who's younger than I am, he had a 17-year-old buddy, very Catholic Orthodox family, 8 kids. He was sitting at his kitchen table, and he got a blood aneurysm in his head, and he was dead within an hour. Okay, 17 years old.
Wow.
And again, very good family, so you look back, And you can say, why does God let things happen like that? And the greatest line I ever heard was in the movie Rudy, when Rudy couldn't get into Notre Dame, and he said, why does God do that? And this old priest said to him, there's two things I've learned in life. One, there is a God, and two, I'm not it. Which I thought is a very, very good way to look at things. And remember the parable of the master who gives the tenants 5 talents, 3 talents, and 1 talent, right? Then the master comes back in a year, and the guy who had 5 said, Master, here's the 5 talents you gave me and the 5 that I invested. Now notice he doesn't say, Master, I'm keeping 1,000 for my time in the last year, okay? In other words, in my humble opinion, God wants everything. Now, the Lord gave it back to him and gave him more responsibility. And the same thing with the guy with 3 talents, right? And then the 1 talent, what happens to him? He says, I buried it because I knew you were a harsh man. Now, a lot of people today would say, oh, well, you know, God's all loving. He's not really, you know, he doesn't, you know, there's really no consequences for everything we do. What does he do? He says, take the 1,000 or the 1 talent from him and tie him up and throw him out. Will there be, you know, grinding and gnashing of teeth? And I think the lesson there is, regardless of what talent you're given, God expects you to make something out of it. And it's not just to make money, it's to save souls. Okay? See Jesus in everyone, including yourself. Seeing that, I've never used drugs. You know, my parents would have killed me, number one. They would have grounded me for about 8 years, and I was in the Navy, ROTC. But I honestly took it as God's given me my health. 2 extended family relatives died of leukemia. One was 8 years old, one was 30. Okay, so I've always considered it a tremendous gift, the health that we have. And that's why, since we're just a steward of the body, I've always thought it would be very sinful to take a chance in ruining that. Seeing Jesus in everyone. I wrote a letter at Christmas once, and there was a 14-year-old girl who was pregnant. No job, no formal education. Her parents were really strict religious people. They wouldn't have understood an unnamed father. And so I asked in the letter, I said, should the girl get an abortion? And what do you think? Now, you guys are all pro-life, but what do you think this buddy of mine who I presented it to, who was a Baptist, he said, yes, she should. Or he said, have they found out whether the baby isn't good? Have they done an ultrasound? So I just said, no, they haven't done an ultrasound. And I said, so he said, yeah, she should get an abortion. Now, do you know who the woman was? Mary. It was Jesus Christ. So here's a Baptist, and he got all mad at me. But every one of us are supposed to see in that handicapped person, that unemployed person, that whatever, that's Jesus Christ. And in fact, and I don't like to read a lot of stuff, but this Matthew 24 is a verse I go to often. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him he will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate them one from another as the shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep at his right hand, but the goats at the left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, come, O blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For when I was hungry, you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you, hungry, thirsty, etc., and take care of thee? And the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did it for one of the least of my brethren, you did it to me. Then he will turn to those at his left hand, and he says, depart from me, you cursed, into the general fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Okay? Now I say to people, especially Christians, if that's what he's going to do to the people who didn't feed, clothe, what is he going to do to the Christians who never did anything to stop abortion? I mean, that's a scary thought. Just not feeding them because they didn't see Christ. So as much as I admire you for being here, we all have an obligation to be here. It's a beautiful thing you're doing, but don't think that, as Christ says in the gospel, you know, a servant who does what he's supposed to do He's just doing what he's supposed to do. Now, I think the joy you will find in doing this is beautiful, but make no mistake, as a Christian, we are required to be out here. We are standing next to the selfish tree trunk. We then decide where we go in our lives. My parents, as you can imagine, encouraged us to get involved. When I say encouraged, they picked what we would do. And one of the things was they had a handicapped day out back in Chicago where they would invite all the handicapped to a certain parish in the archdiocese, and then they would have a nice meal and entertainment. So I was 14 years old, and my parents said, okay, this is what we're doing, so all 6 of us went up there. And the first thing, I get up there, and one of the people said, Bary, would you take John to the restroom? Well, John was blind, and I had never met somebody who was blind, so I didn't know what to say to John. Now, the beautiful thing was how God opened my eyes. John knew that I was nervous, and he starts asking me about myself. He says, oh, are you in high school? I said, yeah. He said, oh, do you run any, what do you do? I said, well, any sports? And I said, yeah, I run track. Oh, what event do you run? And I said, but as I'm walking down, I'm thinking, here's a guy who could be bitter about his stage in life, and he cares enough that somebody he's never met to try and make him feel better. And then the beautiful thing, and there was about 500 people at this, John had a beautiful voice, and he was the entertainment for all of his friends, But had my parents never got us involved, and again, they never took a vote, okay, would you guys feel like doing this today? It was, okay, we're Christians, and we're the parents, and we're going to do this, okay? And that was a beautiful thing. My parents, we went to a Catholic school, and back then in the 70s, or I guess it was the 60s, they had some bad sex ed programs. So my parents pulled my twin sister and me out of the sex ed class, okay? So there was one other kid out of 120 kids that got pulled out of that class, okay? And you can imagine in 8th grade, you're getting pulled out of the sex ed class, that you can kind of get a hard time and all that. It was nothing really horrible, but this one guy who I was actually friends with in grade school, then he kind of went the drug path in high school and college, so we kind of separated, never saw each other. Well, 18 years later, I saw him at a party, and we got talking, and I said, so how are your parents? And he said they both died of broken hearts, and I was one of the main reasons why. And I was like, wow. I mean, like, that's kind of a conversation stopper, But luckily, he had come back to the church, so he realized the error of his ways. But we went on talking, and I could tell something was bothering him. So I said, Jim, is there something you want to talk about? And he goes, now we were 31 years old, okay? He says, do you remember when your parents pulled you out of that sex ed class? I said, yeah. Well, I kind of gave you a hard time. Remember that? I said, yeah, it was nothing too bad. He says, I gave you a hard time, but I admired your parents. Now, this was a guy who was already on drugs. But even then, he admired somebody's parents who had the guts. I mean, 3 kids out of 120. What's that about? 2%? But my parents didn't care. They didn't care. If everybody is going the wrong way, they didn't go that way. Okay? And I want to encourage you young people, when you become parents, if you become parents, or if you become religious, you got to have the guts to stand up for what you believe is right. And what people think, say, or whatever about you, that doesn't matter. Okay? Praying in front of the abortion clinics has been one of the most faith-filled things. We have a late-term abortion clinic, and just last summer, I had the 2 to 3 in the afternoon during the 40 Days for Life. And so I'm holding my rosary and my sign, and these 3 people go walking by, 1 guy and 2 girls. The guy leans towards me and spits at me. Okay? Now, in my 43 years in this movement, nobody has ever spat at me. And I gotta admit, my first thought was drop the rosary, drop the sign, and punch his lights out, because he was littler than I was. But then I thought, that may not convey the Christian, we love you message. So I didn't say anything to the guy. Well, 3 o'clock comes, and my relief isn't there. And I'm like this, well, we don't like to leave the signs because people steal them. You can imagine that, So, lo and behold, it's 3:15, and I see this guy and these 2 girls walking back down the sidewalk. And I'm like, maybe I should just leave. And I'm just praying, Lord, don't let me lose my temper with this guy. They got up next to me, and the guy turns to me and he says, I don't agree with your sign, but I want to apologize for spitting at you. And I was like, wow. And I went over and shook his hand. I said, it took a lot of courage for you to come back here and say that. And so we got talking, and he was an American Indian, and he says, well, I said, aren't you glad your mom didn't abort you? And he says, well, I believe in reincarnation, so she may have aborted my first life. And I got to admit, I've never been hit with that one. And, you know, what do you say to that? So, believe it or not, and I feel it was the Holy Spirit, I said, well, I hope your mom didn't abort any of your lives. But again, you know, I've never been hit with that one. But the funny thing is, so we talked for a few more minutes, and I don't know if I convinced him, but you know what he said? He said, the reason I came back and apologized is because you didn't react with anger when I spat at you. Wow. And you know what? All of a sudden, it flashed in front of me when Christ was getting spat upon by the people as he was being, you know, the crown of thorns. And it brought that alive for me. You know, because we hear it all the time, but I think a lot of us, if somebody spat on me, that's going to, especially if they're smaller than me, that's going to be the last time they do that. And that could have ruined that. But, you know, God enabled me to see exactly where he was coming from. We were doing a Face the Truth about 10 years ago, and it was 7:30 in the morning in Gaithersburg, and this couple drove by and pulled in the parking lot, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's 7:30 and people are going to start swearing at us, and et cetera, and you'd think they could at least wait till 8:30, 9 o'clock when you're more awake. Well, anyway, this couple sits there, then they get out and they come over, and the guy says, we just want you to know that we're not married, my girlfriend is pregnant, we're on our way to work, but she was supposed to get an abortion this Saturday. And because of us seeing those signs, we're not going to do that. So I know, and you now know, that there's a 10-year-old kid walking around that I had something to do with. And all the people like you had something to do with. And it's amazing when you think that your life isn't making a difference, you think back on those things. Okay, but had I not been there, I never would have experienced them. There was a priest I heard when I was 15. He was elderly at the time, and he couldn't believe that the Germans didn't know what was going on in Auschwitz and all these other death camps. So he went outside one of the camps and met an older couple, and they said, yeah, we have been here through the war. And so he said to them, do you know what was going on in the camps? And the woman said, no, we didn't know. It was all secret and all that. And so the priest said, when you saw the trains going in, even though that they, you know, at high sides, you could see in the top, and you could see people, and then the trains would be leaving with nobody in it. Didn't you know something was going on? And the woman said, no, we really had no idea. So he said, well, when you smelled the stench of the burning bodies, which flesh has a very distinct, pungent odor, didn't you know what was going on? And that's when she said, Hitler was good for Germany. He got the economy going again. And the priest looked at him and said, then you did know. Well, we know, okay? And none of your friends shouldn't know, okay? Every one of your friends, in a charitable way, should know what the situation is. In fact, I'm going to try one more thing. I want everybody to close their eyes, and I got a question. I want you to answer for me. Close your eyes, Marie. Okay. If you think abortion is only legal in the first 3 months of pregnancy, raise your hand. Don't look at anybody else. If you think it's only legal in the first 6 months, raise your hand. One hand. Okay, if you think it's legal through all 9 months, raise your hand. Okay. I was just at JCPenney with my little feet pin on returning something, and this gal behind the counter, married, like 26, says, oh, is that a pro-life message? I said, yeah, this is where they 10-week-old fetus's feet. This is the size of their feet. She says, oh yeah, I went to a Christian college. I did a presentation on abortion when I was a senior, and I'm really pro-life. I said, can I ask you a question? And she said, sure. I just asked her the same question I asked you, and she said, well, let's see, Roe v. Wade legalized abortion in the first 3 months. Now, we're 43 years into this. 55 million unborn children have been killed. Okay? There are church-going people who don't know this woman was not a Catholic, but I will bet you, if you asked not the people that are real active, what is the law? They will not know. The majority will not know. And that is a failure of all of us. Okay? In a polite way, we have got to make sure everybody knows what the situation is. If they don't want to do anything, that's between them and God. But no Christian should be unaware of what the law is. Because we're constantly cleaning up from the people who have abortions, who ruin their lives because they get in the situation because nobody's talked about it. Okay? So, there's one example. I gave this talk at Hood College about 10 years ago, and there's a beautiful gal. She was a senior in college, and afterwards we were talking, and she said, I wish I had heard your talk 4 years ago because, I wasn't pro-abortion, but she went to public high school, 4 of my friends had abortions. 3 of them are still psychologically destroyed, and I've lost track of the 4th one. So now she has to live the rest of her life knowing she could have made a difference. Now, she knows God forgives her, but we have to get that information out so we're not sitting there picking up as many pieces because people didn't know. And it surprises me that somebody who was pro-life, a Christian, went to Christian college, had no idea what the law was. Giving blood. My dad encouraged us to give blood. I started in high school. And one of the things that was good for me was they asked you a whole bunch of questions. You do drugs, etc. So that was another example, another reason not to do drugs. Because I would be throwing away the opportunity to help God save lives. Okay? Trying to do my little part. And because I've been healthy, I've been able to give like 460 times. I do blood platelets. And the beautiful thing about it was I started doing, they give you t-shirts when you give blood. So that's basically all I wear. In fact, somebody at summer camp asked me, do you work for the Red Cross? I'm like, no, I'm just really cheap. They give these free t-shirts out. But I work at DOE, and so I was working out, and I had a blood t-shirt on, and this guy says to me, oh, do you do platelets? And I said, yeah, I started a while ago, and I figured it's the least I can do, and no big deal. And he says, oh yeah, John told me about this about 6 months ago. And it's really a great thing. I'm going, well, John was a guy that I talked into doing it 6 months ago. So I tell that story because the little things that you do have a ripple effect on everybody else. Okay? You're not just saving one soul, you're saving many souls. You don't know who's going to talk to somebody else that you had the guts to talk to. And that's an important thing. Roe v. Wade, of course, is January 22nd, and it was my mom's birthday. She was born that night. Okay, I was 15 years old, and after we did cake and everything, my mom was on the phone with Phyllis Schlafly, Joe Scheidler, and some of the others, figuring out what they were going to do. And I never forgot that. Okay, on their birthday. How many people do politics on their birthday? Well, anyway, she instilled in her 6 kids getting very involved. And my sister, who now has 9 kids, she had 2 at the time. She was working at a pregnancy center in Rhode Island. And I was in the Navy for 4 years, and we had not planned on having any children. And we had just found out we were going to have trouble having kids. And we hadn't told anybody yet. And this woman was pregnant and wanted to give her child up for adoption. And the head of the pregnancy center knew that my sister had a brother that was looking to adopt. Well, that was my older brother, and he had already gotten a child. And so my mother called and said, I'm calling about something very special. If you're not interested, just tell me. And I said, you're calling about a baby, aren't you? And she says, how did you know? I said, I don't know. And a month later, my daughter Kristen was born, and she was born on my wife's birthday. So I can never forget my wife's birthday because she's always doing so much for my daughter, right? And Kristen is now 28 years old, and she is the development director for a pregnancy center, and this is my 2.5-year-old granddaughter. Now, every time I see her, it makes you realize if someone hadn't gotten to my daughter's birth mom, she wouldn't be here. Some people actually, at some of the abortion clinics, the people said to me, well, why don't you adopt some of these kids? And I said, I actually have. As if we didn't adopt them, then killing them's okay. Going out on a limb, doing things for other people. We have a very nice young couple. They have 5 kids, homeschoolers, and the mother decided to buy a bunch of these signs, which my niece painted this picture, and my mother actually is spending my inheritance producing them. So anyway, so we sold them in our church, and this one family bought like 8 of them. And this young couple the mother had just had a miscarriage late in her pregnancy, okay? And so at midnight, this mother had her 12-year-old daughter, and they took the sign and planted it in these people's yard. Okay, it's right before Christmas, so it's cold out and all that. The father was in the study, literally kneeling down before a picture of Our Lady of Guadalupe, asking Mary, or asking the Lord for a sign that things were going to be okay. I kid you not. And she heard these people outside and figured out somebody's trashing our yard. And the father went outside and saw that. Now here, I didn't tell this mother to do that. But she had her 12-year-old with her doing that. Now, I'll bet you 10, 15 years from now, that kid is still practicing her faith. And she'll be where you guys are now. Because her parents cared enough to get them involved and said, this is what we do. You know, and she can look back on that. Now, my daughter was 5 years old, and she started asking, can she get a little brother? So lo and behold, my mother had started a abstinence-based education program for the public schools. Now, we all went to the Catholic schools. In 1985, my youngest sister was a junior in high school. So my mom, who never went to college, started a abstinence-based education program out of our kitchen, okay? Got it into the public schools, in Chicago. She was on Focus on the Family, Oprah Winfrey, and all this. Well, there was a guy that was writing a book for her, and they already had one child through adoption, the same age as my daughter, and they were going to adopt this kid, okay? His wife got pregnant. So the birth mom said, do you know anybody, a good Catholic family, that has other adopted children who would want to adopt my kid? And so she said, you know what? This woman who started this abstinence movement, and I'm writing a book for her, they have 3 boys that have adopted kids. Your kid will be one of many. There's now 34 grandchildren, 10 of which are adopted, or who are adopted, okay? So anyway, we got in touch with his birth mom, etc., and we adopted Nathan, my son, who's now 23, and it's an open adoption. And the beautiful part is, Nathan he was a real self-starter. In fact, he's doing Jack's website. He's a computer guy, okay? He works for Intel in California, and he learned growing up how to remodel houses, so he's actually doing that on the side, and 2 of his half-siblings are working for him. You know, because we have an open adoption. She had 3 children with her husband, and talk about a circle of life thing, you know? So they're younger than he is, and so now, through that great story. But see, if my mom had not done that public school education program, we wouldn't have gotten Nathan. Okay, and again, it wasn't her fight. I wouldn't have done it. You know, but she saw Jesus Christ and all those inner city kids, etc. And one of her talks, some of the teenagers, black teenagers, inner city said, you know, you're the first person who ever said we didn't have to have sex. somebody finally set some standards for him. A white woman from the suburbs came down to Chicago. In fact, it was really interesting. The Chicago Sun-Times, which is like the Washington Post, when they first put the contraceptives, they always did it in the inner city. And they had a front page article, "The pill goes to school." They had 4 black ministers and my mother on the front page. You know, here it is. And, you know, the ministers just appreciated. She really didn't see color. She saw Christ in everybody. Operation Rescue, I took part in that. I had the joy of taking part in that. And some of the things that Christ put in front of me, this one gal was there and she said, "Well, I think Operation Rescue is racist." Now here we were in Hillcrest, which is an all-black clinic. All the kids being killed were black. And I said to her, if we really were racist, we would want you to be killing your children. We wouldn't be here trying to save them. And then there was a young couple with us, about 23, and the girl teared up as we were watching one of the gals going in. So I said to her, I said, "Yeah, you're really upset that this girl is going in for an abortion, right?" And she says, 3 years ago, I was that person. She said, I wasn't a Christian, I wasn't married, and there was nobody there to counsel me. And to this day, I still can't get pregnant. Now, going through being unable to have children, I can tell you, is a very trying thing when you didn't do anything to cause it. But think about that, living with knowing that you killed a child and you can't conceive. But see, you are educating people now, so hopefully there'll be fewer people doing that. Then there was another woman, and I'll never forget this, it was over 25 years ago. She said, "I've been on both sides of the abortion issue." I said, "Oh, really?" And she said, "Yeah, I had 3 kids, and my husband was an alcoholic, he used to beat me, and I got pregnant, and there was no way I was bringing another kid into this life." I said, "Oh, what's the other side?" And she said, "My son had a child by some girl, and I'm raising the child." I said, "Oh, I bet your son's glad you're doing that." And she said, "He doesn't care about that child. He never sees that child." And I looked at her and I said, "I bet your grandson's glad you're doing it." And you could see, and God kind of changed my attitude. I was always kind of the people on the other side. If a car were to run over them, I'd be okay with that. I'm thinking, yeah, one less person we have to fight. But after talking to that person, it made me see, I didn't grow up in a family like that. Hopefully none of you did either. But God opened my eyes to see the compassion, and I said to her, I said, you know, killing these other children is not going to make the hatred go away. And I think that's what you guys, and that's what we have to do. Going in the March for Life, one of the most spiritually uplifting things, I'll just tell you, we saw Tony Melendez. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He's the one that has no arms. And his mother took thalidomide in the 60s, and that was a drug that a lot of women took so they didn't lose the pregnancies, and it turns out many kids were born without arms or legs, okay? And we heard Tony, and Nathan was about 8 years old. And he plays like there's nobody better that I've ever heard play the guitar and sing than Tony Melendez. He's as good as anybody you've ever seen. If you didn't see that he didn't have any, he plays with his feet. I didn't say that. He plays with his feet. And had we not gone to the Mass beforehand, my son wouldn't have seen that. And he said to me, I said, you know, when you complain about things, think about this guy. And he said, yeah, how does he even put his shirt on? You know? But if we hadn't been there, I mean, you can tell your kids, hey, be thankful for what you have, etc., etc. But until you see something, and I think God puts those things in our path when we get involved, so it's easier to be thankful for the things you have as opposed to being angry for the things you didn't have. And taking a stand with your friends. I was in Navy ROTC, and every summer you get together with midshipmen from all over the country, and there was about 8 of us in San Diego. We were 21, and this one guy says, hey, let's go out and get some action. Find some girls for some action. And you can imagine what action was to him. So I said to him, I said, do you have a younger sister? And he goes, yeah. I said, if I came to visit you and I took your sister out, and then the next day I told you how good she was in bed, would that bother you? And he goes, yeah, I'd punch your lights out. So I said, okay, so if somebody uses your sister, you're going to punch their lights out, but you want to go out and use somebody else's sister. Okay? That's how we have to present it to people as far as abortion. When I ran for Congress, and people would come up and say, well, I can't accept abortion and rape and incest. And I said, okay, my daughter's adopted. We don't know how she was conceived. So you telling me she has less right to be here than you do? And one woman came up to me afterwards, and after a debate, and she said, well, I could never vote for somebody who wasn't pro-choice. She was elderly, and I said, oh, that's okay. And she kind of looked at me like I was going to grovel for her vote. And she said, well, you know, most of my friends, over half my friends wouldn't vote for somebody who wasn't pro-choice. And I said, oh, well, there's 8 people running, so if I get the other half, I'm going to win the election. Which really torqued her off. Then I figured I'm not going to get her vote, so I thought I'd have a little fun. And so I said, are you a Christian? And she's probably 65. She goes, why, yes, I'm a Christian. I said, you know that part in the Bible where it says Mary went to visit Elizabeth and the baby stirred in her womb? It doesn't say the fetal tissue stirred. And she goes, well, I don't believe everything in the Bible. And I said, ma'am, I've discussed the Bible with a lot of my non-Catholic Christian friends, and we've never disagreed on that. But see, that's how far they have to go to be able to live with abortion. You know, even people who claim to be Christian can make that kind of argument. And I'd ask you, are you the go-to guy for moral, spiritual direction among your peers, family, and friends? You know, people should know. They may not agree with you, but they should think, okay, if I have a problem, I can go to Uncle Joe or Aunt so-and-so, and she's going to give me the right answer. I may not follow the right answer, but she's not going to care whether I get mad or whatever. And your friends should know where you stand. I wear a pin to work, okay, in the federal government. You can get in trouble for that, okay? Yeah. I notice some people have great bumper stickers. Every one of you, and you can go home and tell your parents this, should have a bumper sticker on your car, a pro-life bumper sticker. And one time I was discussing this with a guy, and he says, I don't think I believe in anything enough to put a bumper sticker on my car. This was a Christian. So you're going to stand before God and say, Lord, now with all the martyrs there in the background, and you're going to say, you know, I didn't really believe in putting that bumper sticker on. You should use every opportunity to make a difference. I've had people come up to gas stations, come over and say, hey, I like your bumper sticker. And I've had other people flip me off and all that. But that's okay. If you read the gospel and the letters, Paul was getting beaten regularly. Jesus always was trying to escape because they were trying to kill him. Right? So if you're not getting some negative response to the way you're living your life, frankly, you're not living your life like you should in this society. And again, I'm not saying go out and make enemies, but you should. People should know where you stand and what you stand for. Okay? And if you don't know why gay marriage or abortion is wrong, you should be studying up on it. So you can answer the question. And you do know the law. So when your friend comes to you and say, hey, I'm thinking of doing this, what do you think? You don't go, well, gee, it's not really my business. You know, I don't want to judge you. That's not what the Bible says. We judge acts. We don't judge souls. But constantly the Lord is pointing out, and read the Acts of the Apostle. They're very clear on different acts. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is suggestions, especially for young people. Because a lot of people say, I don't have time to read the Bible. If you're doing social media, you have time to read the Bible. Pure and simple. Okay? And I have yet to run into the young person who doesn't spend some time on social media. There should also be good Christian things that you link to so your friends are not just getting your goofy pictures, your selfies or whatever, which is fine, but they should be learning something and be able to tell you're a Christian from your Facebook page. Because believe it or not, your Facebook page might be, especially if you're in a public school or a Catholic school even, Your Facebook page might be the only exposure they get to the Christian philosophy. Okay? What I try to do is read, there's 31 Proverbs. Every day I at least read the proverb for that day. There's more wisdom in that than you will get reading 10 books. It takes about 3 minutes to do that. So make a deal with yourself. Say, okay, I'm not going to do any social media till I read at least a proverb and something else. And again, think, okay, if I die tonight, God's going to have my day planner left right in front of me. And whether it's going to get you into hell or not. In fact, I teach CCD, high school CCD, and this one kid said to me, well, do you think all the kids that are having sex are going to hell? Because there's a lot of them. I said, that's not my job to determine who's going to hell. If you read Corinthians 1:6-9, it says, fornicators, adulterers, etc. are certainly not entering the kingdom of heaven. So your soul's in mortal danger, you know? And that's our job to point that out. But the question, the way he stated it, and people say, well, God wouldn't send me to hell for that. If you're making that argument, you don't love God. And I'll tell you, I'll give you an example. Let's say you've met the guy or girl that you're infatuated with. And your friends say, hey, did you talk to John today? Yeah, I send him a 10-word text because I don't think he'll dump me as long as I send him a 10-word text. No, you're texting him, you're calling him, etc. But with God, we sit there and ask ourselves, is this enough to get me into hell? If you're asking that question, you're halfway to hell. Okay? God wants everything. Okay? He didn't just get discouraged and go, you know what? This is a real drag. My back is killing me. Forget this crucifixion part. Okay? And that's what he expects from all of us. Okay? Again, these are all my opinions. So, I think that's it. If anybody has any questions, I would be more than happy to answer. Let me take 1 more minute. This is one of my favorite short paragraphs. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who spends great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. By being here today, you are in the arena. And your job is to get other people in the arena. So hopefully the majority will someday be in the arena. Thank you.